I remember the sound of children crying in the night, though we were taught never to cry. The temple on Coruscant hummed with a frequency that lived in your bones, a deep thrum that came from machines older than most civilizations, and in the darkness of the initiate's quarters, that hum would swallow the small sounds of grief before they could travel far. But I heard them. I always heard them. No, my name doesn't matter anymore. None of our names mattered. Not really. Not in the way names matter to families who speak them with warmth over meals, who carve them into tree bark or whisper them as blessings. We were given designations when we arrived, usually based on the system we'd been taken from, and those names were meant to be temporary, placeholders until we earned our true identity as Padawans, as Jedi. I was called Terran, after the Terran system, where my mother Ahai, think it was my mother had handed me to a hooded figure in brown robes. I don't remember her face. I remember the texture of fabric against my infant skin, the shift from rough homespun to the smooth, clean weave of Jedi tunics. That transition is my earliest memory, though I can't be certain if I truly remember it, or if I've constructed it from the thousands of times I imagined what that moment must have been like. The temple was beautiful. I need to say that first, before I tell you what it became in my understanding, because the beauty was real. The halls stretched higher than seemed possible, columns of pale stone that caught the light of Coruscant's perpetual day. And everywhere there was the smell of incense and old paper, of training mats that had absorbed decades of sweat, of the ozone scent that clung to practice sabers. The younglings' corridors were different from the rest stop. Lower ceilings, walls painted in soft colors meant to comfort children who had no other comfort, with murals depicting legends of the Order. I spent hours studying those murals. The ancient Jedi who had founded temples on 100 worlds, the warriors who had defended the Republic, the healers and scholars and diplomats who had shaped galactic history with nothing but their connection to the Force and their unwavering discipline. We were told we were the lucky ones, rescued from lives of poverty or danger, from worlds where Force sensitivity was feared or exploited, from parents who couldn't care for us, or who understood that the Force had chosen their children for a greater purpose. The Jedi who taught us spoke of the Force as a calling, something sacred and absolute, and to be chosen by it was the highest honor in the galaxy. To be brought to the temple, to be given the chance to train and grow, and become part of an order 10,000 years old, this was a gift beyond measure. I believed them. For years, I believed every word. The routine began before dawn, though on Coruscant dawn was more of a concept than a reality, a gradual brightening of the artificial lights that governed our days. We woke to the sound of soft chimes, dressed in our simple tunics, and filed into the meditation halls where we would sit in silence for an hour, learning to quiet our minds, to feel the Force moving through and around us. Master Zeron, who oversaw our clan, would walk between the rows of sitting children, his footsteps so soft they barely disturbed the air, and sometimes he would pause behind one of us and place a hand on our shoulder. That touch meant you were doing well, that your connection to the Force was strong and clear. I lived for those touches. We all did. In an existence stripped of family, of individual affection, of anything that marked us as special or beloved, that simple gesture of approval became everything. After meditation came physical training. We ran through obstacle courses designed to push our developing bodies, to teach us balance and coordination, and pain tolerance. The instructors never called it pain tolerance, of course. They called it learning to work through discomfort or building resilience. But when you're 7 years old, and your muscles are screaming, and your lungs burn, and you're being told to climb another rope, to leap another gap, to hold a handstand for another minute, you understand what's being built into you. We were being taught that our bodies were tools, instruments of the Force, and that our personal suffering was irrelevant compared to our duty. I was good at the physical training. My body was small but quick, and I learned early how to distribute my weight, how to use momentum, how to fall without breaking. Some of the other younglings struggled. There was a boy named Pell from one of the Outer Rim mining worlds, stocky and slow, and I watched him fail the climbing exercises again and again. Watch the instructors mark their datapads with expressions that revealed nothing. Another girl, Cirrus, was brilliant at meditation, but couldn't coordinate her limbs, couldn't make her body obey her intentions, and during combat drills she would freeze, trembling, while the training remotes circled her with their harmless but stinging bolts. We learned not to help each other too much. Oh, we were taught cooperation, taught to work in groups for certain exercises, but there was a line. Too much attachment to another youngling, too much concern for their individual well-being, would earn a quiet word from a master, a gentle reminder that Jedi do not form attachments, that compassion must be universal rather than particular. I watched Cirrus struggle, and I felt something twist in my chest, something that wanted to stand beside her, to shield her, to tell her it would be all right. But I had already learned to kill that impulse. I had already learned that the twist in my chest was a weakness, a failure of discipline, something to be meditated away. The academic training was easier for me. We studied galactic history, republic law, diplomacy, xenobiology, astrogation, linguistics. The Jedi archives were vast beyond comprehension, halls of holocrons and datapads and actual physical books, some so ancient they had to be handled with specialized gloves. I loved the archives. There was a Jedi archivist, a Syrian woman named Tellem, who would sometimes let me stay past the designated study hours, and in the quiet of those extended evenings I felt something close to peace. Knowledge seemed pure to me then. Facts and dates and the mechanics of hyperspace travel, these were solid things, unchanging, and if I could master them, perhaps I could master everything else. But the true measure of a youngling's worth was in the Force training. Every day, after physical and academic lessons, we would gather in the training halls where masters would guide us through exercises designed to deepen our connection, moving small objects with our minds, sensing the emotions of those around us, achieving brief moments of precognition, seeing a few seconds into the future. Some younglings displayed remarkable ability. A Twi'lek boy named Kes could lift a dozen training spheres simultaneously by the time he was 8. A human girl, Mira, could sense disturbances in the Force from across the temple, feeling when someone was injured or distressed before any alert was raised. I was adequate. That word, adequata, became the refrain of my existence. I could move objects, but not as smoothly as others. I could sense emotions, but not as clearly. My precognition was inconsistent, flashing into awareness at random moments, rather than when I concentrated on summoning it. Master Zeron never said I was failing, but he never touched my shoulder during meditation after I turned 9. His attention moved to others, to the younglings whose gifts were more pronounced, whose destinies seemed more certain. There were tests, always tests, small and large. We would be asked to identify objects hidden in sealed containers, to navigate obstacle courses blindfolded, relying only on the Force, to spar with training sabers against opponents we couldn't see, guided by instinct and connection. And always the masters watched and made their marks, their evaluations silent and absolute. The structure of the order was clear. Younglings became Padawans when a Jedi Knight or Master chose them, usually around age 12 or 13. The Padawan would train under their master for years, traveling the galaxy, learning through direct experience, until they were ready for the trials. Pass the trials and you became a Jedi Knight. Fail, and you tried again, continued training. It was a path, a progression, and we were taught to trust in it. But there was another possibility that was spoken of less directly, mentioned only in whispers between younglings, or in the careful euphemisms of instructors. If you reached 13 and no master had chosen you, if your connection to the Force was deemed insufficient, if your temperament was found lacking, you would leave the order. You would be placed in the service corps, the agricultural corps, the medical corps, the educational corps, where you would serve the galaxy in other ways, using what training you had received, but never becoming a true Jedi. We were told this was still an honor, that the service corps did vital work, that not everyone could be a knight, and there was no shame in finding a different path. But I remember the day they came for Tellem, a boy 2 years older than me who had trained alongside us for a decade. I remember how he packed his few belongings in silence, while the rest of us pretended not to notice, how he walked through the temple corridors one final time, and how none of the masters met his eyes. I remember that he was gone by evening, and by the next morning his sleeping platform had been reassigned to a new youngling, just arrived from Alderdan, and it was as if Tellem had never existed at all. The hum of the temple seemed louder after that. Or perhaps I simply started noticing it more, the way it vibrated through the floors at night. A reminder that this place was a machine as much as a monastery, something built to process Force-sensitive children and produce Jedi Knights. And those of us who couldn't be properly processed would be quietly removed. I was 10 when I first felt real fear, not the fear of physical pain during training, or the fear of embarrassment when I failed an exercise. This was different, deeper, a cold awareness that settled into my bones and never fully left. I was watching the older younglings, the 12 and 13-year-olds, and I was counting how many remained unchosen. I was noticing the way certain masters would visit our training sessions, observe for an hour, and leave without selecting anyone. I was understanding, really understanding, that my adequacy might not be enough. The temple held thousands of Jedi, but only a limited number were knights or masters, capable of taking a Padawan. And there were standards, preferences, specific qualities they looked for. Some wanted Padawans with strong combat abilities, future guardians, who would serve in the war that everyone pretended wasn't coming, though even as younglings we heard the rumors of separatist movements and failing diplomacy. Some wanted scholars or healers or diplomats. Some wanted specific species, beings whose physiology complemented their own, or who came from cultures the master understood. And some, I began to realize, simply didn't want Padawans at all, were content in their solitary service or their research or their council duties. The mathematics were cruel. Each year, perhaps 200 younglings reached selection age, Doi. Perhaps 60 to 80 Jedi were ready and willing to take a Padawan. The rest of us would wait, hope, and eventually age out. I started training harder. I would wake before the chimes, would practice moving objects in the darkness of the sleeping quarters, trying to make my connection to the Force as strong as those who seemed to touch it effortlessly. I volunteered for every additional lesson, every extra meditation session. During lightsaber drills, I pushed myself until my arms trembled and my hands blistered. I memorized entire volumes of Jedi philosophy, thinking that if I could demonstrate exceptional knowledge, perhaps that would compensate for my merely adequate Force abilities. Master Zeron noticed. "Why you mellow?" He called me to his chambers one evening, a small room lined with meditation cushions and holocrons, and he sat across from me with an expression of careful neutrality. "You're trying very hard, Terran," he said. I nodded, uncertain if this was praise or criticism. "Why?" he asked. The question confused me. "To improve, Master. To become stronger in the Force." "And why do you wish to become stronger?" "To serve the Order. To become a Jedi Knight." He was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I felt the weight of everything I wasn't saying. Because I'm afraid. Because I don't want to disappear like Tellem. Because I need to matter. Because this is the only home I've ever known, and I can't imagine existing anywhere else. "The Force is not a reward for effort," Master Zeron said finally. "It flows through all living things, but it speaks more clearly through some than others. This is not a judgment of worth, Terran. It simply is. You can train your body and your mind, and you should. But the depth of your connection, that is what it is." "You're ruined." I felt something crack inside me, a small fracture in the foundation I'd been building. "Are you saying I won't be chosen?" "I'm saying that attachment to outcomes leads to suffering. If you are chosen, serve with humility. If you are not, accept that the Force has a different path for you." "The Service Corps," I said, and I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. His expression shifted just slightly, and I saw something that might have been sadness. "There are worse fates than serving the galaxy in ways other than as a knight." But he didn't elaborate. And that night, lying in my sleeping platform with the hum of the temple vibrating through my skull, I wondered what those worse fates might be. I wondered what happened to the younglings who weren't even suitable for the service corps, whose connection to the Force was too weak, or whose temperament was too unstable. I wondered, and the wondering kept me awake until the false dawn brightened our quarters, and the chimes called us to another day of proving ourselves worthy. I turned 11, then 12. The clan I'd trained with began to fracture as Padawans were chosen. Kes, the Twi'lek prodigy, was selected by a Jedi Guardian, a scarred Zabrak woman who specialized in combat and peacekeeping in the Outer Rim. Mira, who could sense disturbances across the temple, was chosen by a healer, a gentle Ithorian, who promised to teach her to mend rather than fight. One by one, my companions left, and each departure was marked by a small ceremony, a blessing from the council, and then they were gone, off to their new lives, and those of us who remained moved closer together in the training halls and sleeping quarters, filling the spaces they'd left behind. Saris was still there, the girl who had struggled with physical coordination. Pell, the stocky boy from the mining world. A Rhodian named Nika, who had arrived at the temple later than most, already 7 years old, and whose basic was heavily accented and hard for the instructors to understand. A human boy, Jace, who was adequate like me, not exceptional in any area but competent in all of them, and who had started having nightmares that he tried to hide, but that I could feel through the Force, waves of distress rolling off him in the darkness. We didn't talk about what we all knew. The silence around our situation was absolute, a void that no one would acknowledge. The masters continued to teach us as if everything were normal, as if we were all still on the path to becoming knights, but their attention was perfunctory now, their focus on the younger clans, the new batches of promising younglings who still had time. I watched the masters who visited our training sessions with desperate intensity, trying to understand what they were looking for, trying to mold myself into whatever they wanted. A Nautilon consular who specialized in diplomacy observed our negotiation exercises, and I studied every aspect of his manner, his speech patterns, his philosophy, hoping that if I could mirror him, he might see potential in me. He left without choosing anyone. A human guardian, young and energetic, watched our lightsaber drills, and I fought with everything I had, ignoring the pain in my muscles, executing every form perfectly. And when the session ended, he complimented my technique and then walked away. A Togruta healer came to assess our Force sensitivity in medical applications, and I focused so hard on the diagnostic exercises that I gave myself a headache, and afterward, she told me I had done well, very well. And then she chose Nika instead, the Rhodian whose basic was rough but whose ability to sense life force signatures was apparently exceptional. Nika left the following week. There were 5 of us remaining from our original clan. My 13th birthday approached. Yow. The temple marked such things only in administrative records, not with celebrations, but I was aware of the date, aware of what it meant. I had perhaps 6 months remaining before the decision would be made, before I would either find a master or be transferred to the service corps, unless I wasn't even suitable for that. The thought had been growing in my mind, a dark seed planted by observation and inference. I had paid attention over the years to which younglings went to the service corps and which simply vanished. The service corps took those who were competent, who had skills that could be applied in agriculture or medicine or education, who were emotionally stable and capable of working within structured systems. But what about those who had nothing to offer? What about the younglings whose Force sensitivity was minimal, whose academic abilities were poor, whose psychological evaluations revealed instability or dangerous attachments? There was a room in the lower levels of the temple, past the maintenance sections where the cleaning and food preparation droids hummed through their routines, where the mechanical systems that sustained a vast structure were housed. I had discovered it by accident during a navigation exercise, had taken a wrong turn, and found myself in a corridor that felt different from the rest of the temple. Colder. The stone walls were unadorned, and the lighting was dimmer, and there was a door marked only with a numerical designation. Through that door, I had glimpsed another hallway, and more doors, and I had heard something that made my blood freeze up. the sound of screaming, muffled but unmistakable, and then silence. I had reported what I heard to Master Zeron. He had looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, and told me that some areas of the temple were restricted, that younglings should remain in their designated zones, that curiosity about such matters was inappropriate. And then he had changed the subject, asking about my progress in my diplomatic studies, and the conversation about the screaming was closed, sealed away as if it had never happened. But I thought about it constantly. Now, I thought about it during meditation, which ruined my concentration and made my connection to the Force even more erratic. I thought about it during lightsaber training, which made me slow and distracted. I thought about it at night, listening to the hum of the temple and wondering what other sounds it was hiding. Jace disappeared when we were both 13. He didn't leave for the service corps. And so, there was no ceremony, no farewell. He simply wasn't in his sleeping platform one morning, and when I asked Master Zeron about it, the Master said that Jace had been transferred to a facility better suited to his needs, that I shouldn't concern myself with matters beyond my responsibility. And that was all. 3 of us remained from the original clan. Dar, me, Saris, and Tell. We didn't speak to each other much anymore. The silence that had always been encouraged in the temple had become total, a suffocating absence of connection that left each of us isolated in our fear. I started meditating in the archives, where archivist Tailasani would let me stay late. I wasn't really studying anymore. I was hiding, seeking refuge in the one place that still felt safe. And one evening, when the archives were nearly empty, I found a restricted holocron that hadn't been properly logged back into its secured section. I shouldn't have accessed it. I knew that even as I activated it, even as the blue light shimmered and coalesced into the image of a long-dead Jedi Master. But I was desperate for understanding, desperate for answers to questions no one would address directly. The holocron contained records from 500 years earlier, before the Rusan Reformation, when the Order had been structured differently. And in those records I found references to younglings who failed to bond with the Force strongly enough, who were evaluated and deemed unsuitable for training. The holocron spoke clinically of severance procedures, of memory adjustments, of rehabilitation protocols for Force null subject. I read those phrases again and again, trying to understand. Severance. Adjustment. To rehabilitation. I'll want to know, he wrote me. You're sure you and you are. I, were just a bride. Force null. They were taking away the Force. Or rather, they were erasing the knowledge of it, suppressing the ability to touch it, ensuring that those who left the temple would never pose a risk, would never use even their limited connection in ways that might threaten the Order or the Republic. And if the Force was all you'd ever known, if your entire identity had been built around it, what would be left after such severance? I deactivated the holocron with shaking hands. I wanted to believe the practices it described were ancient history, discontinued centuries ago. But I thought of Jace and the screaming I'd heard, and the way younglings simply vanished, and I knew. I knew with a certainty that lived in my bones alongside the temple's hum. They were erasing us. Tailasani found me sitting in the darkened archive, and she must have seen something in my face because she sat down beside me. Her long Syrian head bowed in thought. You accessed a restricted record, she said quietly. I nodded, waiting for punishment. What did you learn? That the Order disposes of its failures, I said, and my voice sounded hollow even to myself. She was quiet for a long time. The archives around us seemed to hold their breath. The Order preserves itself, she said finally. That is its primary function. Not to serve the Force, not to serve the Republic, but to continue existing as an institution. And institutions cannot afford loose ends, Taryn. They cannot afford younglings wandering the galaxy with partial training, with knowledge of temple security, with bitterness over their rejection. They cannot afford potential dark, Jedi or criminals, or simply damaged beings who might speak poorly of the Order to the wider galaxy. No, me. So they erase us. They ensure you have a place, she corrected, though there was no conviction in her words. The service corps for those who can be useful. Other arrangements for those who cannot. What arrangements? I demanded. Where did Jace go? What happens to the ones who fail completely? She met my eyes, and in her gaze I saw sorrow and complicity intertwine. There are facilities, medical temples on distant worlds, places where those with psychological instabilities or insufficient force sensitivity can be helped, given new identities, new memories, new lives, far from anything that might trigger their connection to the Force. That's not help, I whispered. That's obliteration. Yes, she said simply, but the alternative is to release deeply troubled individuals with partial Force training into a galaxy that doesn't understand them and cannot care for them. The Order believes it is choosing the lesser harm. And no, Paul, does anyone choose this? I asked. Does anyone consent to being erased? She looked away. Younglings are not considered capable of consent in such matters. The Order acts as guardian. I felt something break inside me then. Not the small crack from my conversation with Master Zeron, but a complete shattering, as if every structure I'd built my identity upon had collapsed at once. I had believed in the Order. I had believed in its wisdom, its benevolence, its sacred purpose. I had believed that even if I failed to become a knight, I would still be valued, still be cared for. But I was inventory. We all were. Resources to be processed, and if we couldn't be processed successfully, we would be disposed of in the cleanest way possible. What about you? I asked Tai Lasani. Do you agree with this? She stood slowly, her robes rustling in the archive silence. I serve the Order as it is, not as I might wish it to be. And I would suggest, Terran, that you focus on becoming valuable enough that such questions don't apply to you. You still have time. A master might yet choose you. But we both knew that wasn't true. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she looked at me as if I were already gone. I spent the next month in a state of barely controlled panic. I trained obsessively, volunteered for every possible assignment, tried desperately to demonstrate value, to prove I could serve the Order in some capacity that would spare me from erasure. But my fear made me clumsy, made my connection to the Force even weaker, and I could feel the Master's attention sliding past me, dismissing me, already categorizing me as unsalvageable. Saris was chosen by a consular specializing in agricultural development, and she left for the Outer Rim with an expression of stunned relief. Pell was transferred to the Agricultural Corps, assigned to a temple farm on Ukiyo where his physical strength would be useful. And then I was alone, the last of my clan, and my 13th birthday had passed 2 months earlier. Master Zeron called me to his chambers again. I knew what was coming before he spoke. Terran, he began, and his voice was gentle in a way that made me want to scream. The Council has reviewed your progress, and while you've worked very hard, your connection to the Force has not developed sufficiently for you to continue training as a potential knight. The Service Corps, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw my fate. Your psychological evaluations have shown increasing instability. Anxiety, obsessive behavior, difficulty with emotional regulation. The Council believes that placement in the Service Corps would not be appropriate in your case. Instead, we're arranging for you to receive specialized care at a facility on Kwaskilam, where you'll be able to heal and find a new path forward. Now, Sue, what kind of facility? I asked, though I already knew. A place of healing. You'll be given the support you need to adjust to life outside the Order, to integrate into galactic society. Many younglings have found happiness there, by forgetting they were ever Jedi. His expression remained carefully neutral, by releasing attachments to an identity that was causing them suffering. I don't consent, I said. I don't want to be erased. Terran? Dot. His voice hardened slightly. This decision has been made. It's in your best interest. Let me leave then. Let me walk out of the temple and make my own way. I won't speak against the order. I won't cause problems. Just let me exist. That's not possible. You have too much knowledge, too much training. You understand how the temple functions, where its vulnerabilities are. You could be captured by those who would exploit that information, or you could fall to darker impulses. Use what force abilities you have in destructive ways. The order cannot take that risk. And there it was, spoken plainly. I wasn't being erased for my own good. Nishirin. I was being erased because I was a security liability, a loose end. And the order valued its own preservation more than my personhood. When? I asked. Tomorrow. A transport will take you at dawn. I returned to my quarters and lay on my sleeping platform, listening to the temple's hum for what I knew would be the last time. Around me, younger younglings slept peacefully, still believing in the order's benevolence, still trusting that they were the lucky ones. I wondered how many of them would end up like me, would reach this same moment of understanding too late to matter. I could have run. The temple's security was designed to keep threats out, not to imprison younglings who knew its corridors as well as I did. But where would I go? I had no money, no contacts, no survival skills beyond what I'd been taught for surviving in controlled environments. Coruscant was vast and cruel, and I would last perhaps a day before I was caught or killed. I could have tried to fight, could have stolen a lightsaber, could have made them drag me to the transport in restraints. But what would that accomplish except confirming every justification they'd used for erasing me? So I did nothing. I lay there and felt the force moving through the temple, through all the sleeping younglings and meditating masters and humming machines. And I tried to memorize the sensation because I knew it would be taken from me. The hum of the temple seemed to grow louder as the night progressed, or perhaps I was simply becoming more aware of it. This sound that had been the constant backdrop of my entire conscious existence. I thought about what it would be like to no longer hear it, to have it cut away along with everything else that made me who I was. Just before the chimes that would wake the other younglings, a figure appeared in the doorway of the sleeping quarters. Te Lasani Dai. She moved silently to my platform and knelt beside it. I'm not supposed to be here, she whispered, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, that you deserved better, that the order is not always as wise as it believes itself to be. I turned to look at her. Nyani, will you remember me? After I'm gone? I will remember, she said. Someone should. Will you do something for me? She nodded. Keep track of how many like me. Count us, the forgotten children who weren't good enough. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I already do. You're the 47th this year. 47? 47 younglings erased, their potential judged insufficient, their existence deemed too risky to allow. And that was just 1 year, just those who had been processed through evaluation and found wanting. I thought of all the years of the Republic, all the centuries the Order had stood, all the thousands upon thousands of Force-sensitive children who had been brought to the temple and had disappeared into the machine. Does anyone care? I asked. Some of us carry the weight, she said, but we are not brave enough to change the system. We serve it, and we tell ourselves we're doing the best we can, and we count the casualties. She stood then and pressed something into my handa, small data chip. This contains information about Qua's Killam, what happens there, the procedures they use, the success rates. Hide it well. If you can retain any part of yourself through what's coming, perhaps knowing the truth will help. And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the data chip in the growing light of false dawn. The transport arrived exactly when Master Zeron had said it would. 2 Jedi I didn't recognize came to collect me, their expressions professionally sympathetic, and I was taken through corridors I'd walked 1,000 times toward a hangar I'd only seen during field trips. Other younglings were already there, perhaps a dozen of them, all around my age or slightly younger. all with the same look of numb resignation. We didn't speak to each other. What was there to say? The flight to Tellem took 6 hours. The planet was in the mid-rim, unremarkable, its surface covered in forests and small settlements. The facility was built into a hillside far from any population centers, its architecture deliberately non-threatening, designed to look like a healing retreat rather than a processing center. They separated us upon arrival. I was taken to a small room painted in soft greens, furnished with comfortable seating and broad windows overlooking the forest. A medical droid greeted me cheerfully, explaining that I would undergo a series of evaluations to determine the best course of treatment, that everything would be fine, that I was safe. The data chip Telasani had given me was hidden in the seam of my tunic. I managed to access it using a terminal in the evaluation room while the medical droid was calibrating equipment. The information it contained made me physically ill. The procedures weren't fast. They took months, sometimes longer, a gradual dismantling of identity conducted through a combination of drugs, memory suppression technology, and force dampening techniques. Subjects are no longer called younglings or even patients, just subjects would be sedated and taken through carefully designed therapeutic sessions where their memories of the temple would be recontextualized as dreams, as symptoms of psychological illness. Their connection to the Force would be systematically suppressed through repeated exposure to Isalamiri, creatures that created bubbles of Force null space, until the neural pathways associated with Force sensitivity atrophied. The success rate, according to the data, was approximately 70%. 70% of subjects could be successfully reintegrated into society with new identities and no memory of their lives as Jedi younglings. The other 30% experienced complications: persistent memory breakthrough, psychological collapse, catatonia, death. Those who died were recorded as having succumbed to previously undiagnosed medical conditions. Those who became catatonic were transferred to long-term care facilities where they lived out whatever remained of their lives in vegetative states. And those who experienced persistent memory breakthrough, who couldn't be successfully erased, simply disappeared from the records entirely. I sat in that comfortable room with its broad windows and soft lighting, and I understood that I was going to die. Not physically, perhaps, though even that was a significant possibility, but everything that made me Terran would be systematically destroyed. And whatever being emerged from this facility would be someone else, someone who had never known the Force, who had never dreamed of becoming a Jedi, who had never spent their entire childhood in service to an ideal that had ultimately consumed. The door opened and a human doctor entered, middle-aged and kind-faced, wearing civilian clothing rather than Jedi robes. He smiled warmly and sat across from me. "Hello, Terran. I'm Dr. Shen. I'll be overseeing your care during your time here. I want you to know that we're going to help you. All the fear and confusion you're feeling it. We're going to work through it together, and when you leave here, you're going to have a wonderful new life ahead of you." "I don't want to forget," I said. His smile didn't waver. "Right now you don't because you're frightened. But trust me, once we've helped you process your experiences properly, you'll feel differently. Many of your peers have gone through this same journey, and they're thriving now." "Where are they? Can I talk to them?" "Patient confidentiality prevents that, I'm afraid. But I can assure you they're doing very well." "How many have died?" The smile finally faltered. "Died? Terran, no one dies here. This is a healing facility." "Hey, 70% success rate," I said, watching his face. "What happens to the other 30%? He was silent for a moment, and I saw the calculation behind his eyes, the decision about how to handle a subject who had accessed unauthorized information. "Where did you hear that figure? Does it matter? Is it true?" "Treatment outcomes vary depending on individual circumstances," he said carefully. "But our primary goal is always the well-being of our patients. Your primary goal is protecting the Order." He stood, his kindness evaporating into cool professionalism. "I think you should rest. We'll begin preliminary evaluations tomorrow." After he left, I tried to access the terminal again, but it had been locked remotely. The windows, I discovered, were sealed, unbreakable. The door responded only to authorized personnel. I was in a cell dressed as a sanctuary, and the pretense of choice had been abandoned the moment I'd revealed I understood what was happening to me. That night, lying on the bed that was too soft, too comfortable, engineered to make me feel safe, I reached for the Force one last time. I had never been powerful in it, never been the prodigy who could move mountains or see across star systems, but I had always been able to feel it, that subtle current running beneath reality, connecting all living things. It was there now, faint but present, and I held onto it like a drowning person holds onto driftwood. I thought about all the other younglings who had lain in rooms like this one, feeling the Force for the last time, knowing what was coming. I thought about Jace and the screaming I'd heard in the temple's lower levels. I thought about Tellem and the boy who had vanished so thoroughly that by the next morning, it was as if he had never existed. I thought about the 47 children erased this year alone, and all the years before, all the centuries of the Order's existence. The Republic revered the Jedi, saw them as guardians, as champions of peace and justice. And perhaps that was true for those who succeeded, who became knights and masters and council members. But the Republic never asked about the children who failed, never questioned what happened to the Force-sensitive beings collected from 1,000 worlds and brought to the Temple with promises of purpose and belonging. The Jedi maintained their mystique by controlling the narrative completely, and part of that control meant ensuring that their failures left no trace. I understood then, with a clarity that came too late to save me, that the Order's greatest fear was not the Sith, not the dark side, not any external threat. Their greatest fear was the revelation of their own machinery, the exposure of the brutal calculus that sustained their beautiful facade. They feared the moment when the galaxy might learn that for every Jedi Knight standing nobly before the Senate, there were dozens of broken children whose potential had been judged insufficient, whose existence had become inconvenient. The next morning, they came for me before dawn. 2 medical droids and Dr. Shen, who spoke in soothing tones about how today would be the first day of my healing journey, how I should trust the process, how everything would be better soon. They guided me through corridors that all looked the same, soft lighting and neutral colors, and the hum of medical equipment that reminded me sickeningly of the temple's hum. And we arrived at a room that was not soft at all. It was clinical, sterile, dominated by a medical chair that was clearly designed for restraint, though they didn't call it that. For your safety during the sedation, Dr. Shen explained as they secured my wrists and ankles. Some patients experience involuntary movements, and we wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. I didn't struggle. There was no point. But I kept my eyes open, kept my connection to the Force as present as I could make it, determined to witness every moment of my own destruction. They placed sensors on my head, my chest, my wrists. A droid administered an injection that made the room swim and blur but didn't knock me unconscious. They wanted me aware, wanted me to participate in my own erasure. A helmet lowered over my head, and through the fog of drugs, I felt something cold and invasive pressing against my mind. Dr. Shen's voice came from somewhere distant. Taryn, I want you to think about the temple. Think about your earliest memories there. I tried not to, but the drugs made resistance difficult. Images surfaced. The texture of Jedi robes, the taste of food from the communal halls, Master Zeron's hand on my shoulder during meditation. Good. Now I want you to understand something important. Those memories aren't real. The temple was never real. You've been ill for a very long time, Taryn. Since you were a small child. Your mind created these elaborate fantasies as a way of coping with trauma. The Force, the Jedi, all the taunt symptoms of your condition. But we're going to help you understand the truth. No, I managed to say, though my tongue was thick. It was real. Is real. Let's try something. Reach for the Force right now. Try to move that medical tray. Through the haze, I tried. I reached for the current I'd felt last night, but it was distant now, muffled, as if someone had wrapped reality in thick cloth. The tray didn't move. I couldn't even feel it, couldn't sense the molecular bonds holding it together, couldn't find the leverage point where intention could become action. You see? Dr. Shen's voice was gentle, poisonously kind. There's nothing there. There never was. Your mind created the sensation, but it wasn't real. The drugs, I said. You're blocking it. Or we're clearing away the delusion, allowing you to perceive reality accurately for the first time. They kept me in that chair for hours, cycling through my memories, recontextualizing each one. The meditation sessions became psychiatric therapy. The lightsaber training became physical rehabilitation. The masters became doctors treating a disturbed child. Master Zeron became Dr. Zeron, a psychiatrist who had tried his best to help me understand that my fantasies weren't real. I fought it at first, clung to what I knew was true, but the combination of drugs and forced suppression and relentless reframing was designed by experts who had perfected this process on thousands of subjects. I felt my certainty beginning to crack, felt doubt seeping in. What if they were right? What if I had been ill all along? What if the Force was just a delusion, a coping mechanism, and everything I remembered was colored by madness? No, MC. No. I reached desperately for the data chip's information, for the concrete evidence that this was real, that I wasn't insane. But the more I tried to hold on to it, the more Dr. Shen's voice suggested that the data chip itself was part of my delusion, something I'd imagined or misinterpreted. And I felt myself fragmenting, unable to distinguish between memory and confabulation. They brought me back to my room, eventually. I couldn't walk properly. The drugs made my limbs heavy and uncoordinated. I collapsed onto the bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to remember who I was, why I was fighting, what was real. The sessions continued daily, sometimes twice daily. Each time they took me deeper into the reframing, each time they made the temple seem more distant, more dreamlike. They showed me fabricated records, medical files documenting my psychiatric treatment since early childhood, school records from a planet I'd supposedly grown up on, images of parents I didn't recognize who they claimed had desperately tried to help their troubled daughter. Your mother loved you very much, Dr. Shen said during one session, pointing to an image of a woman with kind eyes. She wanted you to have a normal life, but your condition made that difficult. Eventually, she had to place you in specialized care. This facility. You've been here for 3 years, Terran, working through your delusions, and you're finally making progress. 3 years? The timeline made no sense. I was 13. I'd been in the temple since infancy. That's what your illness makes you believe. But look at these records. Look at the dates. You're 16, Terran. You've lost 3 years to your condition, but we're getting them back for you. I looked at the records, and the dates were there, documented and official. And I felt reality sliding away from me like water through my fingers. Who was I? What was true? The certainty that had sustained me was eroding, and I began to understand how the 30% who didn't survive must have felt. That moment when the foundation of selfhood collapsed entirely, and there was nothing left to stand on. But there was something they hadn't accounted for, something that saved me in a way they never intended. The Force suppression wasn't perfect. They were using Isalamiri, positioning them around the facility to create overlapping zones where the Force couldn't be felt. But Isalamiri created bubbles, and bubbles had edges, and in the spaces between bubbles, there were thin seams where the Force leaked through. I started noticing it during the walks they made us take, the patients being shepherded through the facility's gardens for exercise and fresh air. There would be moments, brief flickers, where the numbness would lift and I would feel it again. That current, that connection, undeniable and real. And in those moments, the edifice of lies they were building would crack. And I would remember with absolute clarity that I was a Jedi youngling, that the temple was real, that everything they were doing to me was a violation. I started mapping the seams, started understanding where the Isalamiri were positioned, and where their influence weakened. It gave me a focus, a purpose beyond resisting their sessions, and I clung to it desperately. There were other patients in the facility. I saw them during meals, during group sessions, during the garden walks. Most were further along in their treatment than I was, their eyes already empty of recognition, their connections to the Force fully severed. But there were a few who still fought, who I could see struggling against the same tide that was pulling me under. One was a Mirialan girl, perhaps a year younger than me, with geometric tattoos on her face that marked her as having passed certain coming-of-age rites in her culture before being brought to the temple. She sat beside me during a meal one day, and under the pretense of reaching for water, she whispered, "The garden. Third tree from the eastern wall. There's a gap. No. Nice." That was all she said before standing and walking away, but it was enough. That night, lying in my room with drugs making my thoughts slow and heavy, I held on to those words. A gap. Dotty. We know. A turned. All perpetrator. A seam in their control. A possibility. The next garden walk, I paid attention to the third tree from the eastern wall. It was old, twisted, its roots breaking through the carefully maintained paths. And standing near it, I felt a stronger seam than I'd found before, a place where the Force flowed almost normally. I breathed it in, let it fill me, used it to anchor my sense of self. The Mirialan girl was watching me from across the garden. She gave the slightest nod. That night, she appeared in my doorway. I don't know how she'd gotten past the locks, past the monitoring systems, but she was there, and she gestured for me to follow. I was supposed to be sedated, but I'd been hiding the pills they gave me, pretending to swallow, and my mind was clearer than it had been in days. We moved through dark corridors, past doors behind which other patients slept their drugged sleep, past monitoring stations where droids hummed through their routines. She led me down, always down, into the lower levels of the facility where the machinery that sustained everything was housed. And the similarity to the temple's lower levels made my chest tighten with memory and grief. She brought me to a room that was locked, but she placed her hand on the security panel, and I felt her push through the foresight. Not much power, but enough, using the seam she'd found to override the simple lock. Inside was an office, and inside the office was a terminal, and she pulled up files faster than I could follow. "Look," she said, speaking fully for the first time. Her voice was rough, unused to conversation. "Look at what they've done." The files contained everything. Complete records of the erasure program, going back decades. Thousands of names, thousands of children processed through facilities like this one across the galaxy. Success rates. Failure rates. 1. Disposal methods for those who didn't survive. Financial records showing payments from the Jedi Order to the facility administrators. Communications between temple officials and the doctors, discussing how to handle particularly difficult cases, how to refine their techniques, how to ensure complete memory suppression. And there were other records too, darker ones, buried deeper in the system. Experiments. They were experimenting on some of the failed cases, trying to understand Force sensitivity at a neurological level, trying to determine if it could be artificially suppressed or enhanced, using children who would never leave the facility as test subjects. I felt bile rise in my throat. The Mirialan girl. He still didn't know her name. Pulled up another file, and this one contained footage. Security recordings from this facility and others like it. I watched as children were strapped into chairs like the one I'd been in. Watched as some emerged empty, docile, ready for reintegration. Watched as others thrashed and screamed until they were sedated into oblivion. Watched as medical droids disposed of small bodies that had expired during treatment, recording their deaths with the same clinical efficiency they used for everything else. "We have to tell someone," I whispered. "Who?" she asked. "The Jedi Order runs these facilities. The Republic doesn't know they exist. Who would we tell? Who would believe us? We could escape, get to a comm station, contact a journalist, a senator, someone, and say what? We're children with no identification, no records, no proof of who we are. They've erased us, remember? Officially, we don't exist. And if we use the Force to prove what we are, they'll just call us rogue Force users, dangerous, and hunt us down. We can't win. But I couldn't accept that. I pulled the data chip from where I'd hidden it, showed her. We have this. Evidence from inside the temple. And we have these files now. We can download everything, run, and if we can just reach someone who will listen. Alarms shrieked through the facility. We'd been discovered. The Mary Allen girl looked at me with something like pity, and I realized she'd known this would happen, had known we'd be caught, had brought me here, not because she thought we could escape, but because she wanted me to understand, to see the full scope of what was being done to us. You need to remember, she said, as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Even if they erase you, even if they take everything else, remember that this happened. Remember that we mattered. Remember that the Order did this. The door burst open. Dr. Shen stood there with security personnel, his kind face finally showing anger. What have you done? The Mary Allen girl moved before I could process it. She drew on the Force through that seam in the Isalamiri coverage, and even though her power was weak from months of suppression, it was enough. She pushed hard, and the security personnel flew backward. She grabbed my hand, and we ran. We didn't make it far. Well, the facility was designed to contain Force users, even weak ones. Glass doors sealed. Security droids emerged from hidden compartments, and they had weapons set to stun, not kill, because we were valuable. We were data. We were subjects whose neurological responses to erasure were still being studied. The Mary Allen girl fell first, her body convulsing from the stun blast before going limp. I tried to reach for the Force, tried to fight, but there were too many suppressors, too many Isalamiri being brought in by the security personnel, and the current I'd been clinging to vanished entirely. I felt its absence like a wound, like something vital had been amputated, and I collapsed not from the stun blast, but from the sheer emptiness of being cut off completely. When I woke, I was restrained more thoroughly than before. Not just wrists and ankles, but my entire body, immobilized in what I recognized as a medical stasis field. Dr. Shen's face appeared above me, and all pretense of kindness was gone. You've caused significant problems, Terran. Accessing secured files, attempting escape, assaulting facility personnel. These behaviors demonstrate that you're not responding to standard treatment protocols. We're going to have to take more aggressive measures. What happened to her? I asked, my voice slurred from whatever drugs they'd given me. The Mary Allen girl. She's being dealt with appropriately. You don't need to concern yourself with other patients. You're going to kill her. We're going to help her, just as we're helping you. But her case has proven especially resistant, so she'll be transferred to a research track where her unique situation can be studied more thoroughly. The knowledge we gain will help us refine our treatment of future patients. 1. Research track. Test subject. Vivisection of the soul, recorded and analyzed until there was nothing left to study. You're monsters, I said. The Order is supposed to protect people, supposed to serve the Force, and you're torturing children. We're protecting the galaxy from damaged Force users who could become threats. We're preventing the rise of potential dark Jedi. We're ensuring that those who aren't suitable for the Order don't spread misinformation or bitterness about an institution vital to galactic peace. This is necessary work, Terran, even if it's difficult. You're protecting the Order's reputation. That's all this is. You can't let anyone know that you fail, that you make mistakes, that you take children from their families, and sometimes those children aren't what you wanted, and you can't just give them back, so you erase them instead. His expression hardened. The Order's survival is paramount. Individuals, even Force-sensitive ones, are expendable if they threaten that survival. You'll understand that eventually, after treatment, or you won't, and you'll be transferred to research like your friend. Either way, this conversation is over. No, gee. They took me to a different room, deeper in the facility, where the machinery was more extensive, and the isolamiri were positioned so densely that I couldn't feel even a whisper of the force. They increased the drug dosages. They ran the memory suppression protocols longer, harder, pushing my mind past the point of resistance into something like dissolution. I lost track of time. Lost track of who I was. Sometimes I believed I was Terran, the failed Jedi youngling. Sometimes I believed I was a sick girl who had invented the Jedi as a delusion. Sometimes I believed I was no one at all, just a collection of neurons firing randomly in a meat prison that wanted desperately to stop existing. They showed me the fabricated life again and again. The parents who had tried to help me, the schools I'd supposedly attended, the friends I'd supposedly had before my illness isolated me. And slowly, incrementally, parts of me began to accept it. Not because it was true, but because the alternative was too painful. If I accepted their narrative, the torture would stop. If I let go of the temple, of the force, of everything that made me who I was, I could have peace. I almost let go. I came so close to surrendering completely, to allowing them to remake me into whatever docile being they wanted me to be. But there was something that kept pulling me back, some stubborn core of selfhood that refused to dissolve, no matter how much they tried to erode it. It was the hum. The memory of the temple's hum, that deep vibration that had lived in my bones for my entire life. They could suppress the force, could rewrite my memories, could pump me full of chemicals that made thought almost impossible. But they couldn't take away that physical memory, that sensation that was so fundamental to my existence, that it had become part of my autonomic nervous system. And whenever I felt myself slipping into their narrative, whenever I started to believe I was the sick girl with imaginary Jedi, I would focus on that memory of the hum, would hold on to it like an anchor, and I would remember that I was real, that my past was real, that what they were doing to me was evil. The resistance cost me. They noted in their records that I was proving unusually difficult, that my treatment was not progressing as expected. They increased the aggression of the protocols. They kept me in near constant sedation. They brought in specialists, consultants who had developed even more invasive techniques, and they used them on me without hesitation or mercy. I learned later, much later, that I was in that facility for 8 months. 8 months of systematic destruction, of having my mind taken apart and reassembled wrong, of experiencing what I can only describe as ongoing psychological murder. But subjectively, it felt like years. Time stopped meaning anything in that place. There was only the endless cycle of session and recovery, of having yourself erased and then clawing back enough sense of self to resist the next session. The Mirialan girl died. I never learned her name, never got to thank her for showing me the truth. They told me during one of the sessions, using it as a cautionary tale, "Your friend didn't respond to treatment. Her body eventually gave out under the stress. This is why it's so important that you cooperate, Terran. We don't want that to happen to you." But I knew it wasn't a failure to respond to treatment. I knew they had pushed her too far in their experiments, had taken her apart piece by piece to understand how force sensitivity worked, and she had died in agony in some research room while droids recorded data. She had died because she had tried to show me the truth, because she had wanted someone to remember that this was happening. So, I made a choice. A conscious, deliberate choice that may have been the only real choice I'd ever made. I stopped resisting overtly. I let them think their protocols were working. I responded to their memory, rewrites with appropriate confusion and acceptance. I looked at the images of the fake parents and forced tears, told them I remembered now, remembered my childhood before the illness, remembered that the temple had never been real. I became the perfect patient, cooperative and grateful and convinced of my own delusion. But internally, in a place so deep they couldn't touch it, I held on to everything. Every memory of the temple, every moment of training. every name and face of the younglings I'd known. Every word of the files the Mary Allen girl had shown me. I compressed it all into a hard kernel of truth and buried it beneath the performance of erasure, and I waited. They were pleased with my progress. Dr. Shen commended me for my breakthrough, for finally accepting reality. They reduced the sedation, gave me more freedom within the facility, started preparing me for reintegration into society. They created a new identity for Mia Kessa Terran, a 16-year-old girl from Alderaan, who had struggled with psychiatric issues but had successfully completed treatment and was ready to start her life. They gave me documents, educational certificates, even a trust fund to help me establish myself, everything necessary to erase Taryn the failed Jedi youngling and replace her with Kessa, the recovered psychiatric patient. On my last day at the facility, Dr. Shen met with me for a final session. I'm very proud of you, Kessa, he said, using the new name without hesitation. You've worked so hard to get healthy. Do you understand now how sick you were? How the delusions had taken over your life? Yes, I said, and I made sure my voice trembled just right, vulnerable and grateful. I understand. Thank you for helping me. And the Force? The Jedi Order? You understand those weren't real? They were symptoms, I recited. The script they'd taught me. My mind's way of coping with trauma. I see that now. Good. That's very good. You're going to have a wonderful life, Kessa. You have so much potential, so much to offer the galaxy. Put the past behind you and move forward. I nodded, smiled, played the part perfectly. And 3 days later, I walked out of that facility with my new identity, my fabricated records, and my trust fund. And they believed they had successfully erased another failed youngling. But I remembered everything. I spent the next year on Alderaan, playing the role of Kessa Terran, attending university, making friends, building a life that looked normal from the outside. I was careful never to use the Force, never to do anything that might draw attention. I underwent regular psychiatric check-ins via holocall with facility counselors, and I performed my recovery perfectly, showing no signs of relapse or memory breakthrough. And in secret, using funds I'd carefully diverted from my trust account, I began investigating. I found the other facilities, cataloged their locations, used slicing skills I taught myself to access their databases remotely, downloaded everything I could find out, patient records, financial transactions, communications with the Jedi Order, research data, footage of treatments and failures and deaths. I learned that the Mary Allen girl's name had been Kyra. She had been from Muriel, brought to the temple at age 4, had shown early promise before her abilities plateaued, had been evaluated and discarded at age 12. She had lasted 6 months in the research track before her body failed. Her death was recorded as complications from a pre-existing condition. She was 14 years old. I learned that the program had been running for centuries, in various forms, always with the same goal: ensure that failed Jedi younglings left no trace, posed no threat, became no embarrassment to the Order. I learned that thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of children had been processed through these facilities over the generations. Some were successfully erased and reintegrated. Some died during treatment. Some ended up in permanent care facilities, their minds broken beyond repair. And some, a very few, were transferred to research tracks where they were studied until there was nothing left to study. I learned that the Republic had no idea any of this existed. The facilities were funded through obscure budget channels, classified as diplomatic resources or cultural preservation programs. The Jedi Order maintained complete control over them, and the Senate never questioned how the Jedi handled Force-sensitive children, because the Jedi were above reproach, were heroes, were champions of light and justice and peace. But I had the proof. I had documentation that even the Order couldn't explain away or dismiss, and I started planning how to use it. All new. The challenge was timing. If I released the information too early, before the galaxy was ready to question the Jedi, it would be dismissed as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist, or worse, proof that I hadn't been successfully treated and needed to be recaptured. I needed to wait for a moment when the Order's reputation was already vulnerable, when the galaxy was ready to see that the institution they revered might not be as benevolent as everyone believed. That moment came 3 years later, when the Clone Wars began. I was 19 then, still playing the role of Kessa, working as an analyst for a minor news organization on Coruscant. The war changed everything. The Jedi, who had been peacekeepers and diplomats, became generals. The Temple, which had been a place of meditation and learning, became a military headquarters. And suddenly, the galaxy was seeing the Jedi in a new light, not as mystical guardians, but as warriors, as leaders of clone armies, as beings who commanded troops and made strategic decisions, and wielded their power in increasingly visible ways. The Republic's trust in the Jedi was still strong, but it was no longer absolute. Questions were being raised. Why were the Jedi leading armies? Was it appropriate for a religious order to have so much military authority? Were they truly neutral arbiters of peace, or were they factional actors pursuing their own agenda? It was time. No. I released the files systematically, through multiple channels, to journalists and senators and activists who had already shown willingness to question authority. I didn't attach my name to any of it. He remained Kessa, a minor news analyst with no connection to the leaked information. But I made sure the data was verifiable, that anyone who looked could trace it back to the facilities, to the financial records, to the communications between Temple officials and the program administrators. The response was explosive. The first journalist to break the story was a Twi'lek named Lin Sar, who had built a reputation for investigative work on corporate corruption. She published a series of articles under the headline, "The Jedi's Hidden Program: What Happens to Failed Younglings?" And the galaxy reacted with shock, with horror, with disbelief. The Jedi Order denied everything at first, called it misinformation, enemy propaganda designed to undermine their war effort. But too many people had the files now. Too many independent analysts were verifying the data. And within a week, investigative teams from multiple news organizations had located the facilities themselves, had interviewed staff who confirmed the programs existed, had found records that matched the leaked documents exactly. The Senate launched an investigation. The Jedi were called to testify before multiple committees. Master Yoda himself appeared, and I watched him on the holofeed, his ancient face grave, as he admitted that yes, the Order maintained programs for younglings who did not complete training, and yes, those programs sometimes involved memory adjustment. But it was all done for the child's benefit, to prevent suffering, to ensure they could live happy lives unburdened by failed ambitions. He made it sound compassionate, made it sound like they were helping us. But then the families came forward. Parents who had given their Force-sensitive children to the Jedi decades ago, who had been told their children would be trained and cared for, who had never heard from them again. Parents who now learned that their children had been erased, their memories destroyed, their identities replaced, and they hadn't even been told. Parents who discovered that their children had died during treatment, and the Order had never informed them, had simply disposed of the bodies and moved on. The footage from the facilities leaked next. I hadn't released it initially. It was too graphic, too disturbing. But someone else with access to the files had no such restraint. Suddenly, the galaxy was seeing children strapped into chairs, seeing them scream and seize and break, seeing medical droids catalog deaths with clinical efficiency, seeing the research labs where some of the failed cases had been taken apart, literally and figuratively, in the name of understanding the Force. The Jedi Order's reputation, which had stood for 10,000 years, cracked. Not everyone turned against them. Many still believed in their essential goodness, insisted that the program must have been managed by a rogue faction, that it didn't represent the Order as a whole. But the absolute, unquestioning trust was gone. The Jedi were now beings who could be questioned, who could be held accountable, who had admitted to doing things that looked an awful lot like the kind of evil they claimed to oppose. The Senate investigation continued for months. Testimony from survivors who had retained fragmented memories. Testimony from facility staff who had believed they were doing important work, doing important work. Testimony from Jedi Masters who defended the program as necessary, as the only way to prevent damaged Force users from becoming threats. And testimony from families who had lost children to a system that had never even asked for their consent before, erasing their sons and daughters. The Order was forced to shut down the facilities, forced to release all current patients immediately, to provide them with resources and support, to allow independent oversight of any future programs, forced to issue a public apology that admitted the program had caused harm, though they never fully acknowledged the scale of that harm, or took real responsibility for the thousands of erased children. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The galaxy knew, now. The truth was documented, undeniable, part of the historical record. And I, still playing the role of Kessa, still maintaining the fiction of my recovery, watched it all unfold with a satisfaction that was cold and sharp and tasted like vindication. But the satisfaction was hollow, because Kyra was still dead, because the tens of thousands of children who had been erased over the centuries were still erased, their potential still stolen, their lives still destroyed, because the Jedi Order continued to exist, continued to claim moral authority, continued to take Force-sensitive children from their families, and even with reforms, even with oversight, I knew that the fundamental logic remained. The Order's preservation was paramount, and those who couldn't serve it would always be disposable. The Clone Wars ended in fire. Order 66. The Jedi Purge. The rise of the Empire. I watched from Coruscant as the temple burned, as clone troopers hunted down every Jedi they could find, as Emperor Palpatine declared the Order enemies of the state and authorized their complete extermination. The galaxy, which had been questioning the Jedi just months before, now mourned them. They were martyrs suddenly, tragic heroes destroyed by treachery. The revelations about the erasure program were conveniently forgotten in the face of their dramatic fall. I felt nothing watching the temple burn. No grief, no satisfaction, just a vast emptiness. The institution that had shaped and destroyed me was gone, but its victims were still gone too, still forgotten. And now the Empire was doing openly what the Order had done in secreta, identifying Force-sensitive children and eliminating them, crushing any potential threat before it could manifest. Different methods, same logic. Maintain control. Eliminate loose ends. Ensure institutional survival at any cost. I remained on Coruscant through the Empire's early years, continued my work as an analyst, and continued documenting. Now I documented Imperial atrocities, the erasure of entire worlds, the enslavement of populations, the machinery of oppression that made the Jedi Order's sins look quaint by comparison. I sent information to what remained of the rebellion, helped where I could, and tried to find meaning in resistance. But at night, lying in my apartment while the Imperial city hummed with a frequency that reminded me sickeningly of the temple, I would reach for the Force. It was still there, that connection I'd been taught to suppress, that they'd tried to erase. Weak from decades of intentional neglect, but present. And I would let it flow through me, would feel the current that connected all living things, and I would remember every child who had been denied this connection, who had been severed from it as punishment for not being powerful enough, useful enough, compliant enough. I am 63 years old now. I have spent most of my life as Kessa, the recovered psychiatric patient, the woman who overcame her delusions and built a productive life. My fabricated identity is more real to the galaxy than Terran, the failed Jedi youngling, ever was. The records say I had a mental illness. The records say I was treated and healed. The records say I've been a model citizen, a minor but reliable journalist and analyst, someone unremarkable and unthreatening. But I remember every moment of the temple, every lesson, every meditation, every night spent listening to the hum. I remember Master Zeron's hand on my shoulder. I remember Kyra showing me the truth at the cost of her life. I remember 8 months of systematic torture disguised as treatment, of having my soul scraped away and replaced with lies. The Empire fell eventually. The New Republic rose. And I'm told that Luke Skywalker, the hero who redeemed his father and brought balance to the Force, is rebuilding the Jedi Order, training a new generation, trying to create something better than what came before. I wonder if he knows. I wonder if anyone told him about the facilities, about the erasure program, about what the old order did to children who didn't meet their standards. I wonder if his new order will have systems in place to prevent the same abuses, or if the fundamental logic the order must be protected, must be preserved, must be maintained at any cost, will eventually lead to the same cruelty under different names. I think about contacting him sometimes, about telling him my story, warning him about what can happen when an institution prioritizes its own survival over the well-being of the beings it claims to serve. But I'm old now, and tired, and I've spent 50 years hiding who I really am. The prospect of revealing myself, of claiming the identity that was stolen from me, feels impossible. So instead, I'm writing this, an account of what happened, documented and encoded, to be released after my death. Let this stand as testimony. Let the galaxy know that for every Jedi Knight who stood nobly before the Senate, there were children like me who were judged insufficient and quietly erased. Let them know that the Order's beautiful facade was built on the bones of its failures. I still feel the Force even now. It's weakened me. Decades of suppression and neglect have atrophied my connection. But it's there, a quiet current that reminds me I was never delusional, never sick, never the broken thing they tried to make me believe I was. I was a child with a gift, and that gift wasn't strong enough for their purposes, so they tried to destroy me rather than admit they had no place for beings like me. The hum of Coruscant at night is different from the Temple's hum, but similar enough that it still triggers memories. I lie awake listening to it, this city that has been Republic capital and Imperial seat and Republic capital again, and I think about all the other children scattered across the galaxy, the ones who were successfully erased, who live now with fabricated identities and no memory of what was taken from them, the ones who died during treatment, whose bodies were disposed of, and whose deaths were recorded as natural causes or pre-existing conditions, the ones who survived but were left broken, warehoused in care facilities where they exist but do not live. I think about Kyra most often. She would be 59 now if they hadn't killed her. She might have become a farmer in the agricultural corps, might have found peace tending crops on some distant world, might have lived a quiet life free from the Order's demands. Or she might have escaped somehow, might have found her way to the rebellion, might have used her limited Force abilities to fight the Empire. Or she might have become a merchant, a teacher, a parent, any of 1,000 possible lives. Instead, she became a research subject. Her death contributed to a paper on Force sensitivity, neural pathways that was circulated among facility doctors, classified and encrypted, her name reduced to a case number. I have that paper. Regarding a sealer, behavior you are, you rest that tastu, not away. I've kept copies of everything. There are moments when I wonder if the Order was right, if beings like Kyra and me were dangerous, if our resentment and pain could have led us to darkness, if the erasure program was truly the lesser evil. But then I remember that we were children. We were children who wanted nothing more than to serve, to belong, to be valued. We would have been grateful for any place in the galaxy where we could use our gifts, however limited, to help others. We would have accepted positions in the service corps, would have worked as aides to active Jedi, would have done anything except cease to exist. But we were never given that choice. The choice was made for us by an institution that could not tolerate the existence of beings who knew its secrets, but couldn't contribute to its power. We were security liabilities first, people second, and when those priorities collided, our personhood lost. The New Republic established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission after the war, documenting Imperial crimes, providing recognition to victims, attempting to create some form of restorative justice. The commission reviewed the files I had leaked decades earlier, during the Clone Wars, and they issued a report acknowledging that the Jedi Order had operated programs that violated Republic law regarding consent and medical ethics. They recommended reparations for survivors and families, recommended memorials for those who died, recommended that any future Jedi organization be subject to independent oversight. The recommendations were never implemented. There were too few Jedi left to hold accountable, too few survivors who wanted to come forward, too many other atrocities that seemed more urgent. The galaxy moved on, but kept documenting. I located survivors, dozens of them, beings living under fabricated identities who retained fragmentary memories of the temple, who experienced flashes of force sensitivity they'd been taught to suppress, who suffered nightmares about medical facilities and chairs and erasure. I recorded their stories anonymously, compiled them alongside the official records, built an archive of testimony that would survive even if we did not. Some of them thanked me, or some were angry, insisted they didn't want to remember that I was reopening wounds they'd spent decades trying to heal. Some had no memory at all. The erasure had been complete, and they dismissed my attempts to contact them as harassment, as the delusions of a conspiracy theorist who couldn't accept that the noble Jedi Order would never do such things. Those last ones hurt the most. Seeing beings who had been erased so thoroughly, they defended the institution that destroyed them, who had internalized the narrative so completely they couldn't recognize their own victimization. I wondered sometimes if I should have been like them, if accepting the erasure would have brought peace, if my stubborn clinging to truth had only prolonged suffering. But then I would think of Kyra, would remember her determination to make sure someone knew, someone remembered, and I would continue. This was the only thing she had asked of me. The only gift I could give her. Luke Skywalker's Jedi Temple was attacked 12 years after the Empire fell. I was too old by then to do more than watch the news feeds, but I watched with a sick sense of inevitability as reports came in of a massacre, of students killed by one of their own, of the temple burning, and Luke vanishing into exile. The details were sparse, but I pieced together enough to understand. Another failure, another young person who hadn't fit the mold, another tragedy born from an institution that couldn't accommodate beings who struggled or doubted or felt drawn to power they didn't fully understand. His name was Ben Solo. He became Kylo Ren. And I wondered if anyone had tried to help him before he fell, or if the New Order had the same blind spots as the old, the same inability to admit that their system might be flawed, that their methods might create the very darkness they feared. I'm dying now. The doctors say I have perhaps 6 months remaining, maybe less. My body is finally giving out after decades of holding on through sheer stubbornness. And I find myself thinking about what comes after, about whether there's anything beyond this life, whether I'll see Kyra again, or Master Zeron, or any of the thousands of children who were processed through the machinery of the Order's self-preservation. I don't know if I believe in the Force's will, in cosmic justice, in any meaning beyond what we create through our choices. The Jedi taught that the Force had a plan, that everything happened for a reason, that we should trust in its wisdom. But if the Force's plan included the systematic erasure of children, included my torture and Kyra's death, and the suffering of thousands, then I want nothing to do with its wisdom. Or perhaps the Force has no plan at all. Perhaps it's simply there, a current flowing through reality, and we decide how to use it, what to build with it, who to become in relationship to it. The Jedi built an institution. They built rules and hierarchies and systems of control. They built an organization so committed to its own survival that it would destroy children to preserve its reputation. They could have built something different. They could have created support systems for younglings who struggled, alternative paths for those with limited abilities, transparency about their processes, and accountability for their failures. They could have admitted that Force sensitivity exists on a spectrum, that not everyone can be a knight, that there's honor in serving the galaxy through quieter means. But that would have required admitting imperfection. That would have required sharing power and accepting oversight, and trusting that the Order's value came from its service rather than its mystique. And institutions rarely choose humility when they can choose control instead. I've arranged for this testimony to be released 6 months after my death, along with all the documentation I've compiled over my lifetime. The files from the facilities, the survivor testimonies, the financial records proving the Order funded these programs for centuries, the footage that shows exactly what erasure looked like. Everything. The galaxy may not care. It's been decades since the Order fell, and the few Jedi who remain are trying to rebuild something better. My revelations may be dismissed as ancient history, as the actions of a corrupt institution that no longer exists, as irrelevant to contemporary concerns. But it will be documented. It will be in the record. And perhaps some young person, some future Force-sensitive child being evaluated and judged and measured against impossible standards, will read this and understand that they matter, that their worth is not determined by their power level or their compliance, that the institutions that claim to serve the Force can be wrong. I want them to know that I existed, that Terran existed, before they tried to erase her and replace her with Kessa, that I was a real person with real memories and a real connection to the Force, however weak, and that connection was valid and valuable, even though it wasn't strong enough for their purposes. I want them to know that Kyra existed. That she was brave and desperate and determined to reveal the truth even knowing it would cost her everything. That she died at 14 in a research facility, her body and mind taken apart to serve the Order's quest for knowledge. And she deserved better. She deserved so much better. I want them to know that all of us existed. Every child whose name appears in the facility records, every youngling who aged out and disappeared, every Force-sensitive being who was judged insufficient and erased. We were real. We mattered. We mattered. We deserved to be remembered. The Temple's hum lives in my bones still. I hear it in the quiet moments, feel it vibrating through my awareness like a ghost of sensation that will not fade. It's the sound of the machine that processed me, the institutional rhythm that tried to destroy me, and I have carried it with me every day for 50 years. But I have also carried the truth, and that truth will outlive the institution that tried to bury it. I am Terran. I was a Jedi youngling. I was deemed inadequate and sentenced to erasure. I survived by becoming someone else, by hiding who I truly was, by pretending the torture had worked, while secretly holding on to every memory they tried to take. I survived. And I bore witness. That is my legacy. Moi. Not the life of Kessa Terran, the respectable analyst and recovered patient, but this testimony, this account of what the Jedi Order did to children who failed their standards. Let it stand as warning. Let it stand as memorial. Let it stand as proof that we existed, that we mattered, that what was done to us was wrong. The Force is with me still, even now, even weakened and suppressed and neglected. I feel it in the space between my breaths, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the early morning stillness. It connects me to everything that lives, to Kyra who died decades ago, to every child who was erased, to the galaxy itself in all its vast indifferent beauty. The Jedi taught that there is no death, only the Force. But they lied about so many things that I don't know if I believe even that. Perhaps death is simply the end, a cessation of awareness, a final silence after a lifetime of noise. Perhaps there is nothing waiting for me except the same oblivion they tried to force on me at 13. But if there is something beyond this life, if consciousness continues in some form, then I hope I will find the children who didn't survive. I hope I will find Kyra and tell her that I remembered, that I kept the promise she asked of me. I hope I will find all the forgotten ones and tell them that their names are documented now, that their existence is recognized, that they were not erased completely because one of them refused to forget. I am 83 years old. I am dying. I am Terran, though the galaxy knows me as Kessa, and this is my testimony. We were the forgotten children of the Jedi Order. We were cast aside because we were not strong enough, not compliant enough, not valuable enough to preserve. They tried to erase us. They tried to make it as if we had never existed. But I remember, and now you will remember too. The Force is still with me. I'll be you too, let me sure sighs. It always was. They never managed to take that away completely, no matter how hard they tried. And as I prepare for whatever comes next, I reach for it one final time. Let it flow through me the way I did as a child in the temple, before I understood what failure meant in an institution that could not tolerate imperfection. I feel the current. I feel the connection. And I feel everything that is alive and aware in this vast galaxy, all of it woven together in a pattern too complex for any single being to comprehend. And in that pattern, I feel the echoes of all the children who were forgotten, all the ones who were erased and scattered and silenced. They are there, part of the Force, part of the eternal flow, and their absence has shaped the galaxy as surely as the presence of those who succeeded. We mattered. We mattered. We were real. We existed. Remember? Us. That is all I ask. That someone, somewhere, remembers that we existed, that what was done to us was wrong, that the Order's beautiful legacy was built on a foundation of discarded children. The hum is fading now, or perhaps I am fading, and I can no longer tell the difference. But I have done what I set out to do. I have borne witness. I have told the truth. I have ensured that our erasure was not complete. The Force is with us. It always was. Even when they tried to take it away, even when they told us we were delusional or sick or broken, even when they strapped us into chairs and systematically destroyed our sense of self-awe, the Force was still there, connecting us to everything that lives, proving that we mattered simply by existing. They tried to make us nothing. But we were always something. We were always real. I am Terran. Babe. I was a Jedi youngling. I was cast aside. But I remember. And now so will you.